mentioned, it's important to narrow in on the goals of the event that dictate who should attend. The value of success isn't always determined by the number of people registering. The question is, do you want the people who are attending to maybe complete a particular action after the event? Do you want to inspire a certain demographic to do something as a result of the event? Answering this who question will dictate your marketing strategy and the critical criteria of success moving forward. Next, why attendees buy your tickets. Knowing that it is typical for a person to buy a ticket due to several factors, which we've mentioned, it's important that you are aware of the channels it will take to communicate those reasons to a particular audience so that they can hear your message and then register. These vary per organization, and therefore it's important for you to think about your own unique situation. But these typically include things like word of mouth, personal recommendations in any industry, in any vertical is typically the best way for people to join up. But we can combine with our other things, exclusive invitations, incentivizing a certain group to sign up. Maybe it's an influencer recommendation. It's not just a friend, but it's somebody who the particular demographic really recognizes and admires, who recommends people sign up is always helpful and typically one of your best forms of marketing. Because one of the main reasons that many attend an event is because other people they know are attending, it's critical to get the mavens in a particular social group to sign up, those people who are early adopters. Number 2 channel, social media marketing. This has become such a pervasive way of communicating to today's generation. Providing value through social media channels is always a good precursor to then inviting the audience through normal posts or through paid advertising. And then number 3, your traditional advertising channels of TV, radio, print, pay-per-click, banner advertising can still be effective to reinforce your message. And getting all 3 of these channels to come together is often the way to get people across that finish line. It's also important to distinguish between the reasons people will buy a ticket or register for your event and the reason they will remember it. Your brand values and the reason they feel connected to your tribe, which will result in word-of-mouth recommendations and repeat visits. The brand value is built through the value that you deliver at the event, which could be as little as providing value through a networking platform. But real loyalty comes when you can actually create unique and memorable experiences. And this leads us in to the building of the event. So that's pretty much all there is for this section, but let's go through our checklist. So we've thought about the why of your event. We've thought about who your main audience is and how you will communicate to them about attending. Now we need to get into the meat of planning your event. And the first part now is determining when the event should take place and how long it should last. Now, event producers who are familiar with the cadence of an in-person physical event are often curious and ask us whether there are similar optimal times and durations for online events. There's no exact science in answering this question. However, there are some guiding principles which must be considered. In-person events will often require an attendee to take time out from their usual schedule. It might include travel and booking accommodation, and if this is the case for a significant portion of your audience, then it's often wise to make the hassle involved in travel, and staying away from home worth it? You, as the event producer, must be concerned with the creation of space in the event, time for networking and meeting, as well as determining the potential for curated moments in plenary sessions which unite the messaging and can mobilize your entire audience. Now, hybrid events, online and in person, typically have the same considerations as in-person events, as it mirrors the in-person event experience. Now, it often comes as a surprise to first-time hybrid event producers that the people attending the online portion of the event are actually physically present at the event. They may have other commitments, or they may be in a hotel room, and they don't want to miss out on certain parts of the event. It may be that they missed a plenary session because of an offline meeting, and they are catching up with the flow of the event. The bottom line with hybrid events is that you should simply mirror the in-person schedule. Exclusively online events may be treated slightly differently. Since they don't require attendees to take time off work, one more significant consideration is that attendees may only be joining outside of work hours, unless, of course, you're hosting a work event, in which case holding it within typical working hours becomes optimal. Many in-person expo-type events have very little main stage time and spread the event over a number of days so that attendees can network, have offline business meetings, grab a coffee or lunch together. These same components are not all present with online events. The event isn't constrained by a physical place, and therefore the times when aspects of the event happen will differ. It's important that you give thoughts to when your main plenaries in a virtual event happen for this very reason. If you typically have longer, more drawn-out plenaries, you may think about condensing your main program slightly time-wise. I might add that it's important not to swing the pendulum too far in the other direction. It's not unusual for our project managers to advise clients on the need to actually include breaks in their schedule when they have multiple back-to-back one-hour sessions. In addition, while you can't grab lunch with someone online, there are still numerous networking tools that should be factored in your event. Maybe give thought to how your event can be more than a simple one-way broadcast. The question remains, when should you schedule certain components within maybe a multi-day event? Now, there are no hard and fast rules. You know your audience, and we can have constructive conversation about that. But we typically see a few general rules that are different than in person. We often see spikes at the beginning of an online event in a much greater way than we would in an in-person, where people may arrive late. And then, as with in-person event, we will see spikes when top bill presenters, music acts, or VIPs are on stage. And so hopefully that's helpful as you start planning and thinking about the timing and the duration of your event. So that's pretty much all there is for this section. So let's go through our checklist. Whether you're having an entirely in-person, a hybrid, or an exclusively virtual event, there are a number of questions that you need to answer. One of the first questions is related to venue and production. Often this seems to be answered more easily for in-person than online events. It's natural that if you're having an event for, say, 15 people, you may choose to have it in a boardroom and ensure there are enough snacks and refreshments in the room for the duration of the meeting. And then if you're having a 15,000 person event, you're going to rent an arena with adequate audio-visual production so that the audience doesn't have any challenges with seeing or hearing what is going on. Now, similar principles are true for online events, and yet sometimes the production elements for online events are not thought through thoroughly. WebRTC, that's Web Real-Time Conversations, and other video conferencing applications that you'll be aware of are amazing tools for real-time interactions. However, their strength is in connecting individuals through low-latency video connections. And that's usually for small numbers of people and not for broadcasting a high-quality message to thousands. Now, if you're having a 15-person boardroom meeting and you wish to take it online, then utilizing such WebRTC, Zoom-type applications is the right choice. If you're broadcasting a message to thousands, however, using a low-latency application is probably not the right choice. Now, the first answer to this question is production value. If an individual is invited to present a TED Talk type presentation, there will often be nerves involved. The individual has to get the presentation just right. There are numerous books on the market of how a person can do this effectively. In addition to the person's presentation and how they look on the day, the presentation is typically given on a thought-out, clutter-free stage with high-quality cameras placed perfectly, lights, audio, visual, which mean that the only thing that is focused upon is the message itself. Everything is just right to present that message. Video conferencing lends itself to convenience, extemporaneous communication, and ultimately disposable content, which is often not the right feel you want to go for when you're going for a high-quality presentation. While a presenter can prepare their content in a similar manner to a TED Talk, presenting it through a webcam in a home with poor lighting, poor audio, and distracting background, with a high risk for video dropout and audio sync issues and typically no tech help, it's not often the most ideal solution. It must be noted that there are definitely ways to improve the production quality of video conferencing conversations, recording on a higher quality camera with better lighting, audio. However, these things can often be logistically challenging, especially if you're dealing with a presenter half a country away that is slightly tech challenged. Number 2, the buffering issue. Now, personal experience and larger analytic studies reveal that audiences hate buffering. Frame drops, other glitching in video, low latency video technologies currently make the risk of such occurrences happening much, much greater. And the risk is only increased with a larger audience. To avoid issues like this, when presenting to larger audiences, we suggest that you utilize a professional encoding solution for such live situations. Now, thinking about what you want to communicate and how that will be communicated needs to be a holistic process, whether you are planning in person or online. What is the content? How is it presented via video? i.e., what is the production quality? And what platform you are using to present it are all relevant questions to answer. Sardius, we have a high-quality interactive platform. However, if the production quality and the content of the video is not very good, then the overall experience will not be a compelling one. So that's pretty much all there is for this section, but let's go through our checklist. In this session, we're going to be talking about a subject that may seem very administrative, and that's registration. In actual fact, the conversation you have around this very issue actually determines a whole lot about your event and your attendees' experience. So let's jump in. Determining whether your event should have a registration wall is one of the first practical considerations in building your event, as this will be the first thing that is built. It may be true that you can attract a bigger audience on social platforms such as Facebook or YouTube in a short period of time for relatively little cost, but the challenge with this approach is that it's Facebook and YouTube that are the ones who reap the benefits of knowing and serving your audience rather than you. The future of all media delivery is undoubtedly increased customization for the viewer. And the real question you need to be asking right now is whether you want social media platforms to be the one getting to know and serve your audience, or whether you want to be the ones doing that. Registration walls, whether they are paid or free, undoubtedly place a barrier of entry in front of any audience, and a barrier that undoubtedly reduces the amount of attendees. But on the flip side, it also significantly increases the attendees' commitment to your event and to your cause. It communicates a level of exclusivity which is often desirable, and it can significantly cover the costs of your event. Social media strategy should certainly be a component of your overall marketing strategy. However, limiting your content delivery to a single platform decreases your ability to know and to serve your audience effectively. One of the key strategies that we advise at Sardius is to host your event to your own URL and thereby increase awareness of your website and your online community. Sardius will typically host your event at a subdomain of your URL. For example, we often put like a subdomain watch.yourhomepage.com. This integrates with your online home and cements this location as a place for you to serve and interact with your audience effectively. We often advise you to use your social media channels not only to engage your audience with your message and market the event, but also to add value through broadcasting introductory or maybe free public-facing plenary or breakout sessions, which ultimately then point back to your event URL address. And maybe we say clip out certain highlights throughout the event and throw it onto your social media channels. If you don't have an extensive social media presence, it might be advisable to utilize some channels of friends, maybe sponsors or other friends that do have a significant online social media presence. And in that way, you can syndicate valuable content, which can ultimately grow your audience. Now, once you've determined that you wish to create a registered event, another key component to this decision is whether the event will include a paywall or not, and also what type of information you need to collect during this registration process. So we'll go through a few of those type of events. Let's look firstly at the free event registration. Now, that might be as simple as collecting the email addresses and names of your attendees, and some clients even provide the main sessions of the broadcast completely for free with no registration at all, but then offer many of the features of interactivity, the breakouts, maybe the post-event video on demand as perks, which come if you do that free registration. Such a free registration may be worth it to you in order for you to build your CRM database. Keep in mind that it's often advisable to actually connect the registration information collected here to your day-to-day source of truth client database so that you can make the most of the data. And also to understand how your audience has interacted with your event through the analytics, which we will address later. Once we've determined to do a registration, one of the next key questions is, should I charge for my event? Now, a paywall doesn't always mean that you have to sell tickets. An alternate option could be a voluntary suggested donation for the event, especially in the case of nonprofits, which technically for us works in much the same way as a ticket sale. Many event organizers will not actually cover the cost of the event simply through ticket sales, but with revenue from other sources coming from sponsors, donations, and other ancillary revenue channels during the event. Every event is different. For one portion of high demand, high ticket price events, paying the event bill is never a challenge. But for another portion of event producers, breaking even may be a very high priority for you. Now, as you would expect, the normal rule of supply and demand applied to your ticket sales. Now, more information at registration and higher ticket prices will typically lead to fewer people making a commitment and going through with a purchase. Another consideration that is often relevant for nonprofit events is that when you sell tickets, there is a requisite expectation created related to your event of a certain level of quality in the deliverables, which often includes a high-touch customer service necessity. And therefore, such organizations may choose the route of a suggested donation for a ticket instead. Now, there isn't a right or wrong approach in answering these questions. However, you should consider them alongside your main event metrics as you build your registration. The next section we're going to look at is gathering the right information for you. With any type of ticketing, you will need to determine the fields of information you wish to collect. These may include information necessary for registration and the smooth running of your event, information necessary to create a user profile in the event, and any other marketing information that is helpful for you. I'm just going to run through a list of examples of fields that you may consider, and we'll bring it up on the graphic. Name, your first and last name, email address, a full physical address, a partial physical address, country, state, postal code, telephone number, maybe social media links, a short bio, a profile picture of the attendee, a type of ticket required. You may want to suggest different types of audience journeys throughout the event. You may want to have a field for promotional codes, credit card information, and custom marketing questions and opt-ins. As we look at these fields, one of the questions that comes up, should I be concerned about privacy issues in collecting this data? As more and more companies have profited from using the personally identifiable information, PII, of their constituents, privacy concerns have become an increasing concern for any online endeavor. Now, in many countries around the world, legal frameworks have been created to protect citizens from the unscrupulous practices of certain online companies. Now, even if privacy concerns are something that you have never considered before, it's important, if you have an online presence and you collect any kind of personally identifiable information, that you give it a little bit of thought. If you have a web or an app presence, now would be a good time to develop your own privacy policy, terms of service, and perhaps a cookie policy to communicate that you are not one of those unscrupulous organizations who are going to sell data to the highest bidder. As you build the registration of your event, it's important to display these policies to your audience to communicate how you are using the audience's information. We typically find that displaying these opt-ins at the point of registration is the right place to communicate these policies. Related to these privacy issues is obviously GDPR, CCPA, and other legal requirements around the world. Now, if you have a significant audience in Europe, UK, or in California, it's important that your online event is compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, EU and UK, and the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, respectively. You are responsible as the data controller of your constituents' information. And in a subsidiary manner, Saudius Media is responsible as a data processor for your constituents. Other jurisdictions around the world have similar provisions to GDPR and CCPA, and Saudius tries to keep up to date with many of these. But we've placed an emphasis on compliance with both GDPR and CCPA, as these, up to this point, have been the gold standard in relationship to privacy compliance. Saudius will provide you with all the relative documentation, regarding how we use the information to aid in the smooth running of an online event, and will require you to give permission so that we can process your data. The next question in building your registration is, should I limit the number of devices per registration? Privacy issues are nothing to be afraid of. While you shouldn't be using the personal identifiable information for purposes for which you're not authorized, obtaining the consent of attendees to opt into your calls to action is often exactly what both you and the attendee want. Business models moving forward will increasingly rely upon the organization's ability to customize their services and communications to their clients. I find it both reassuring and convenient to walk into a local coffee shop where they know your name and they've already prepared your coffee. One barrier to collecting this information, however, is when individuals share their username and passwords. And this has been a problem that Netflix and many of the other online video platforms have to deal with. When Barry from accounting tweets out his access codes and suddenly 1,500 people are using it, you have a lot of useless information about Barry. Added to the fact that you may have missed out on selling many tickets and a lot of money. For these reasons, we recommend that you limit the amount of devices per registration. When an individual buys a ticket or registers to a Sardius-powered event, a unique token is created per registration, and that is used to create the individual event journeys throughout the event. It's also possible to restrict the amount of devices that can access the event on that token. As you build the registration, it's important to consider your goals and whether you wish to restrict each token to a specific number of devices, whether it's 1 device, 10 devices, 20 devices. Audience journeys. You may choose to develop an event where every attendee is served the same content the same way. Alternately, you may wish to create an event where the audience either chooses or is placed in a custom journey related to their audience segment. In much the same way as you have choices in an in-person event, you need those same choices online. Now, this may change what content that audience segment sees, which after they've entered the event, or these choices may be made by the audience during that registration process. I'm going to run through a few examples of choices that the audience can make either before registration or after registration. The first one is audience segment. Do you have a leaders track and a youth segment and a VIP segment that needs to be served different experiences, different content than the general audience? This might be determined by a ticket type in the registration process. Secondly, breakouts. Do you have multiple breakout sessions in your event, some of which should be attended by different affinity groups? Again, it is possible for individuals to opt in to this right journey for them in the registration process and therefore make an indication of which breakout they will attend at that point. Chat watch parties. In larger events, it's not advisable to have the entire audience in one chat window. Obviously, depending on how interactive the audience is. As a rule of thumb, I always say if you have an audience over 1,000, you may consider breaking your audience into watch parties by maybe geographic region or affinity group. Selecting skilled and appropriate moderators in your watch parties can add a significant value to your event. Moderators might be subject matter experts, maybe regional representatives, or maybe in a church it might be a group pastor or a cell group leader. It's also sometimes advisable to include the actual presenter in the watch party if the video being played is actually played simulated live. And so you add that live component to the event, and so people can ask questions on the fly. One-on-one meetings is another component. Part of any event are exclusive experiences. Meeting one-on-one with subject matter experts, consultants, counselors, or for personal prayer is one such exclusive experience. While this might be decided later on in the event, it's also possible to schedule this experience through the registration process and make this part of the individualized journey for the attendee. building your online registration. For online events, registering for the event with your organization may be the first point of contact that an attendee has with you. Therefore, there are a number of elements to think through in addition to the fields of information that you're collecting. And these ultimately relate to assets that our project managers and event managers typically ask you to provide us with. Firstly, the design of the ticketing. You need to be thinking about including your event branding in the ticket. Secondly, confirmation message once registered. This is the page that appears immediately after registration to indicate success in registration. We have some stock confirmation pages, but advise you to customize this message as it's from you to the attendee. The registration confirmation email content, this is very similar to the confirmation message we just talked about. Now, we have some examples of what good confirmation emails look like, but again, this is a message from you, so it's important to ensure you get the message and the tone correct from your organization. Lastly, the pre-event landing page. Once an individual has registered, they won't experience the full event until the day that it begins. However, it is still possible to move the objectives of the event forward with an effective pre-event landing site. This is the location where registrants will be directed to upon completing registration. It includes your basic branding elements with a written welcome message and usually a countdown to when the event will open. We also advise that in addition to any text, you include a welcome video, which can help orient your audience regarding what to expect at the event, as well as creating excitement and maybe pointing people to a specific call to action that you may have in that pre-event build-up period. This might be a temporary landing page until the event watch page is created. Now let's talk about collecting money for a moment. A number of ticketing services out there handle the payment processing of an event for a significant fee, which is often taken off the top of the monies collected before the remainder then reaches you. Now we at Sardius operate on a different model, and that's a bring your own Stripe account approach. This means that you will pay the percentage transaction fee, maybe that 2 to 3%, and then receive the income directly from your audience to your bank account. The next question is, when should I open registration? Now, some organizations have established behaviors concerning when they open registration for their events, and it would create confusion to their audience if they veered from this course. However, when no such general behavior has been established, a common question that is often asked is when registration should be opened. Now, while many aspects of a physical event and an online event are transferable, this is one area that must have a few different considerations. An in-person event will often require the audience to take time off work, or at least their day-to-day schedule, if it's an internal organizational event. This often requires much more forward planning, including travel, accommodation arrangements. For this reason, it's often important to open event ticketing up to a year or more in advance for an in-person event. Added to this is the fact that an in-person event often has limited capacity at every level of the event, which could add the motivation to buy early. Now, an online event does not invade as much of the day-to-day schedule of an audience, a fact that must be considered when creating the event schedule if it's entirely online. And therefore, opening up the registration closer to the event and building a clear communication plan from the start of the registration to the end of the event and beyond is something that should be considered. For hybrid events, you may even consider opening up the online portion of the registration later than the in-person portion. While you can still utilize early bird pricing in online events have no real space limitations for the size of an audience. While you can utilize early bird pricing in online events really have no space limitations for the size of the audience. This doesn't mean that an event should have an unlimited registration. Unique limited experiences based on human limitations of breakout watch parties or VIP one-on-one consultations may create that exclusivity that is often a big selling point for an in-person event. So that's pretty much all there is for this section. So let's go through our checklist. In this session, we're going to go through all the considerations that you need to think about in relationship to producing your online event. When you design a large in-person event, much thought is often given not only to the content that is delivered from the stage in the main plenaries, but also to the design of the stage and the main auditorium. Also critical is the decor, flow, and hospitality from registration through the main sessions, the breakout seminars, the layout and the movement flow of attendees moving from main session to the exhibition hall, let's say, and finally, the time and the spacing between sessions. All of this process, along with thousands of other considerations unique to your organization, takes time and consideration. The bottom line is the way that the event is designed communicates to attendees their value and the value of the experience. Design gives us the opportunity and the ability to create the correct emotion and feeling needed to highlight the importance of the content that is being communicated in your event. Now, similar motivations must guide the approach to designing an online event. An amazing brand contained with killer design, implemented with a highly intuitive user experience, will create the difference between a good and a great event. Creating this wow factor, as we like to call it, is something that will create that difference. Your audience is typically part of your tribe. They've come to your URL to experience your event. Now, while your audience could experience your broadcast within the context of a social media platform or even a cookie-cutter platform, in such scenarios, often the platform itself becomes a dominant part of the experience. You are, in essence, meeting in, say, Facebook's building rather than your own. Now, those of the utilitarian mindset may not care for this design aspect.